Your scars are symbolic messages from the unconscious, carrying meanings far deeper than the events that created them. Most people think a scar, whether emotional, psychological, or spiritual, is simply a mark left behind by pain. But in the language of the psyche, a scar is never just a reminder of injury. It is a form of communication, a message encoded by your inner world to reveal something your conscious mind was not yet able to face when the wound occurred. When life hurts you, the pain is only the surface. The real impact happens underneath, in the silent chambers of the unconscious, where your beliefs, fears, memories, and hidden truths reside. A scar forms not only on the body or mind, but also on the soul, and its purpose is not to punish you, but to awaken you. The unconscious speaks through symbols, and scars are among its most profound symbols. They represent not only suffering, but also survival. Not only what broke you, but also what remade you. Your unconscious is always trying to bring you toward greater wholeness, and sometimes the only way it can do that is by forcing you into experiences that reveal what you've been avoiding. A scar becomes the final shape of that revelation. It is the psyche's way of saying, something happened here that you must not forget. Not because remembering will cause you pain, but because forgetting would cost you growth. Think about the moments that created your scars. They were not random. They were emotional earthquakes, psychological storms, spiritual ruptures that came to shake loose what was no longer aligned with your true self. The pain overwhelmed you at the time, but beneath the chaos, something deeper was happening. A scar forms only when healing begins. That means every scar, by its very existence, is proof that you have already survived what you once thought you never could. Your unconscious uses scars as landmarks. They are the markers on your internal map, telling you where crucial parts of your identity were formed. They point to turning points, moments where your old self cracked so a stronger version could emerge. You may not have chosen the wound, but you have chosen what the scar means to you now, and that choice is everything. Scars often carry clarity. They sharpen your intuition, deepen your sensitivity, and strengthen your boundaries. They remind you of who you no longer are and what you no longer accept. People who have never been broken often have fragile egos, but those who carry scars possess a resilience that cannot be faked. They do not fear darkness because they have already walked through it. They do not fear disappointment because they have rebuilt themselves from it. They do not fear loneliness because they have found themselves inside it. This is why scars are powerful symbols. They hold memory, meaning, strength, and transformation all at once. They show you not only where life hurt you, but also where you were forced to confront parts of yourself you would have otherwise ignored. The unconscious uses pain because pain demands attention. It wakes you up. It forces you to see what complacency kept hidden. A scar is the final imprint of that awakening. Some people try to hide their scars, believing they make them unattractive or damaged. But what they fail to realize is that scars are the most honest parts of them. They are places where the mask fell, where the truth erupted, where vulnerability became unavoidable. Nothing reveals your real nature more clearly than the things that once hurt you, the things that scraped away illusion and showed you your core. When you try to erase or deny your scars, you deny the very lessons that shaped your inner strength. You deny the wisdom that came from surviving what others may never understand. You deny the evolution that turned pain into depth, confusion into clarity, and weakness into capability. Your scars are not interruptions of your story. They are the story. They are the chapters that redefined your character. They carry the emotional fingerprints of your most transformative battles. They symbolize not what you lost, but what you gained. Self-knowledge, awareness, boundaries, and an intimacy with your own soul that only hardship can create. Whenever your scars ache emotionally or psychologically, it is the unconscious speaking again. It is reminding you that healing is not a one-time event, but a continuous integration. The scar may close the wound, but it continues to teach long after the pain has faded. It becomes a lifelong whisper, urging you toward authenticity, urging you to remember your strength, urging you to stay awake to the truth of who you are becoming. Your scars are symbolic messages from the unconscious, because they hold meaning that words cannot express. They are the soul's handwriting, carved in the language of experience, telling the story of how you broke open and discovered your hidden strength. Every wound marks the place where transformation began, even when the pain feels meaningless or cruel in the moment it happens. A wound is not just an injury, it is an interruption, a rupture in the continuity of your life that forces you to confront what you could never have faced willingly. It is the moment destiny bends your path without asking for permission. And though the initial shock feels like destruction, the deeper truth is that the wound is where your evolution quietly starts to unfold. Transformation never begins in comfort. Comfort preserves who you already are. Wounds reveal who you could become. When life pierces you emotionally, spiritually, or psychologically, it exposes everything you have outgrown but kept holding on to. Your beliefs, your expectations, your illusions, and even your self-image are shaken loose. In that tearing, something new finds space to emerge. But you rarely recognize this in the moment. At first, all you see is the pain. All you feel is the loss. All you notice is the fracture. Yet beneath the surface, a different process has begun. A wound forces you inward. It pulls you into the depths of yourself, into places you would not voluntarily explore. It strips away the layers that kept you comfortable but stagnant. Pain throws you into a confrontation with your hidden fears, your suppressed emotions, and your unhealed history. And in this confrontation, transformation begins. You learn truths about yourself that peace would never have taught you. You gain clarity that calm would never have offered. You develop strength calm would never have demanded. Wounds do not just hurt you, they shape you. Often, the moments that wounded you became the turning points of your life, even if you didn't recognize them at the time. The relationship that broke your heart forced you to build boundaries. The betrayal that shattered your trust taught you to trust your intuition. The failure that humiliated you redirected you toward a path that aligned with your soul. The loss that emptied you created space for a deeper purpose. What felt like ruin was often the blueprint for rebirth. A wound is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of a new chapter. When something breaks, the unconscious begins rewriting you. It rewires your beliefs, strengthens your instincts, and shifts your priorities. You stop living on the surface of life and begin sinking into its depths. You begin to sense what matters and what never did. You begin to see yourself not as someone who was harmed, but as someone being remade. The wound opens you not just to pain, but to awareness. This is why the places where you were hurt become the places where you grew. Pain has a way of carving space for wisdom. Suffering forces honesty. Disappointment dissolves illusions. Grief strips away the unnecessary. In the rawness of being wounded, a different version of you begins to assemble itself. One that is more conscious, more grounded, more resilient. The wound becomes the threshold through which your stronger self enters. Even when you try to avoid transformation, wounds refuse to let you remain who you once were. They demand that you evolve. They demand that you let go. They demand that you release old narratives and old identities that no longer serve your growth. You cannot go back to who you were before the wound, because that version of you was incapable of surviving what you have now endured. The transformation is not optional. It is embedded in the wound itself. Every wound carries a hidden message, that you have reached the point in your journey where change is no longer negotiable. Whether you wanted it or not, the wound opened the door to a deeper dimension of yourself. And once that door opens, it cannot be closed. You begin to see life through different eyes. Your values shift, your passions deepen, your perspective expands. The wound has already begun its work. Over time, you may even realize that the wound didn't break you, it broke you open. It cracked the shell of the person you once pretended to be and revealed the person you were meant to become. You discover strengths you never knew you possessed. You awaken capacities you never believed were inside you. You develop emotional intelligence, empathy, patience, and inner stability that only hardship can forge. The wound becomes a sacred site, a place where your old self fell and your new self rose. You may still feel the ache, but the ache reminds you of your transformation. You may still feel the scar, but the scar reminds you that healing took place. And healing is always proof of evolution. The wound is not the moment you broke. It is the moment you began to rebuild, to awaken, to become more aware, more conscious, more alive. What you repress becomes your shadow. And the shadow is not a flaw in your character. It is the part of you that holds everything. You were too overwhelmed, too afraid, or too unprepared to face. Repression is not a conscious choice, it is a psychological reflex. When something feels too painful, too shameful, or too threatening to your sense of identity, the mind pushes it downward, away from awareness. It hides the memory, the emotion, or the truth in a dark corner of the psyche where you think it can no longer touch you. But nothing buried stays silent forever. What you repress does not disappear. It transforms, grows, waits, and eventually returns as your shadow. Your shadow contains all the pieces of you that were exiled, the anger you were taught to suppress, the sadness you learned to hide, the desires you believed were unacceptable, the fears you pretended you didn't have, the insecurities you denied, the memories you pushed aside because they were too heavy. These parts accumulate in the unconscious, forming a parallel version of you, one that influences your actions, emotions, and relationships without your awareness. You may think you are in control of your life, but the shadow is often the unseen force steering your reactions. Repression creates the shadow because anything you deny in yourself must find another outlet. The energy does not vanish, it shifts shape. It becomes irrational triggers, unexplained anxieties, sudden anger, emotional numbness, overreactions, self-sabotage, and projections onto other people. You start to see in others what you refuse to see in yourself, blaming them for qualities you secretly carry. This is how the shadow speaks, through your behavior, through your defensiveness, through the things that disturb you without explanation. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the part of you that was never brought into the light. It contains rejected emotions, but also forgotten strengths. Every talent you doubted, every passion you suppressed, every instinct you distrusted, every truth you silenced, these are also in the shadow. What you repress does not only include pain, it includes power. Your shadow holds the courage you abandoned to survive your environment, the voice you quieted to be accepted, the confidence you buried to avoid judgment. The shadow is the storage place of everything you could become if you dared to integrate what you once ran from. People fear the shadow because they misunderstand it. They believe facing their buried emotions means losing control. But in reality, avoiding the shadow gives it more control. What you refuse to confront goes stronger in the dark. It influences your relationships, your choices, your moods, and your patterns. You keep repeating the same mistakes because part of you is making decisions from the unconscious level. You are pulled toward situations that force you to deal with what you have repressed. Life keeps presenting mirrors, hoping you will finally recognize your reflection. Healing begins when you stop running, when you turn inward and ask, what is it that I have been avoiding? The shadow will not shout, it whispers. It appears as discomfort, as tension, as the moments when you react more intensely than the situation requires. The shadow reveals itself when you are triggered, offended, jealous, defensive, or unexpectedly emotional. These reactions are signposts pointing toward unresolved wounds. They are invitations, not punishments. To face the shadow is to reclaim the truth of who you are without judgment. You do not need to like what you find. You only need to acknowledge it. The moment you shine awareness on a repressed part of yourself, it begins to lose its destructive power. Awareness dissolves shame. Acceptance dissolves fear. Integration dissolves fragmentation. As you bring your shadow into consciousness, you become more whole, more stable, and more authentic. Integrating the shadow does not mean acting out every impulse or exploring every dark emotion. It means understanding them, accepting them as part of your psychological reality, and learning how to express them in healthy ways. It means recognizing your anger without letting it control you, acknowledging your fear without letting it shrink you, embracing your desires without hiding them, honoring your needs without suppressing them. When you do this, the shadow stops being a threat and becomes a source of energy and creativity. People who have faced their shadow possess a depth that cannot be learned from comfort. They become grounded, perceptive, and emotionally intelligent. They no longer fear their own darkness, and because of that, they no longer fear the darkness of others. They can hold space for pain without collapsing. They can recognize manipulation because they understand their own vulnerabilities. They can love honestly because they are no longer lying to themselves. What you repress becomes your shadow, and the shadow becomes your silent teacher, holding every lesson you were not ready to learn when the wound first appeared. Healing is not about removing pain, but integrating it, because pain is not an enemy to be defeated, but a message to be understood. Modern culture teaches you to escape discomfort, to numb what hurts, to bury what feels overwhelming. But the psyche does not grow through avoidance, it grows through awareness. Real healing asks you not to run from your pain, but to turn toward it, listen to it, and allow it to become part of your inner structure. Pain becomes destructive only when you treat it as something foreign, something that shouldn't exist, something you must erase instead of interpret. Pain is a form of communication. It is the psyche's way of signaling that something within you needs attention, acknowledgement, or transformation. When you try to remove pain without understanding it, you silence the very voice trying to guide you. Integration asks a different question. Not how do I get rid of this, but what is this trying to teach me? In that shift, pain loses its power to torment you and becomes a source of insight. To integrate pain means to allow it to occupy space in your awareness without letting it dictate your identity. You do not pretend it didn't happen. You do not diminish the impact. You do not shame yourself for feeling it. Instead, you explore it with openness, curiosity, and honesty. You say, yes, this hurt me. Yes, I carry this. And yes, I can understand it without letting it define my entire existence. Pain becomes one part of your story, not the whole story. People often think healing requires forgetting what happened or moving on as if the wound never existed. But forgetting is not healing. It is repression. And repression creates internal fragmentation. When you reject painful experiences, you also reject the parts of yourself shaped by those experiences. You split into pieces, one version of you that tries to appear functional, and another version buried beneath layers of unprocessed hurt. That hidden version influences your reactions, your relationships, your fears, and your choices. You cannot escape what you refuse to face. Integration is the opposite of fragmentation. It is the slow and deliberate act of welcoming back the parts of yourself that pain pushed into the shadows. Maybe it was the child in you who needed protection. Maybe it was the teenager in you who felt misunderstood. Maybe it was the adult in you who carried burdens too heavy to admit. When you integrate pain, you reclaim these versions of yourself. You give them space to speak, to be seen, to be understood. You become whole not by removing pain, but by embracing every part of yourself shaped by it. Healing also means recognizing that pain has already changed you. It has altered your beliefs, your boundaries, your emotional responses, your values, and your worldview. Integration requires acknowledging that transformation. You ask, who am I now because of what I experienced? Not in a way that glorifies suffering, but in a way that honors the strength, wisdom, and sensitivity you developed through it. Pain integrated becomes intuition. It becomes discernment. It becomes compassion. It becomes boundaries. It becomes clarity about what you deserve and what you will no longer tolerate. When you integrate pain, it stops being a wound and becomes a form of guidance. It becomes a part of your inner compass, directing you toward healthier choices and deeper self-awareness. This is why removing pain is not only impossible, it is undesirable. Pain removed leaves emptiness. Pain integrated creates structure. It becomes part of the architecture of your inner world, shaping your emotional depth, your resilience, and your connection to yourself. The goal is not to eliminate pain, but to change its meaning, to transform it from a weight that drags you down into a foundation on which you stand stronger. Integration does not happen quickly. It is a process of returning to the same pain again and again, each time from a higher level of awareness. You revisit the memory, the emotion, or the trigger, not to relive it, but to reinterpret it. Each time you do, the pain softens. It becomes less of a threat and more of a teacher. You begin to see that the pain did not break you. It broke the illusion of who you thought you were supposed to be. Integration allows you to reconstruct yourself with greater honesty. Healing through integration also means allowing pain to exist in your present without letting it dominate your future. You learn to hold discomfort without collapsing under it. You learn to feel emotions fully without drowning in them. You learn to acknowledge fear without obeying it. You become capable of experiencing pain and peace at the same time. That is the essence of emotional maturity, the ability to carry your wounds without letting them control you. Healing is not about removing pain, but integrating it. Because integration is what transforms pain from something that happened to you into something that now lives inside you, with purpose, meaning, and wisdom. The self is forged through suffering, not because suffering is desirable, but because it breaks through the layers of illusion that keep you asleep to who you truly are. Comfort maintains identity. Suffering reshapes it. You do not discover your strength, your depth, your boundaries, or your purpose when life is easy. You discover them when you are confronted with the parts of yourself you cannot avoid, cannot hide from, and cannot negotiate with. In the moments where you feel stripped of everything familiar, the core of your true self begins to take shape. Suffering forces you inward. When the external world can no longer provide stability, you begin to search inside yourself for something unbreakable. You start digging through your fears, your wounds, your memories, your disappointments, looking for the one thing that can carry you. And in that search, you encounter the raw material of your selfhood. You begin to see what within you is genuine and what is merely conditioning. You see the difference between the identity you inherited and the identity you must create. It is through suffering that the scaffolding of your false self collapses. The self is not a static object, it is a continual act of reconstruction. Every painful experience removes something unnecessary and reveals something essential. When you suffer betrayal, your self learns discernment. When you suffer loss, your self learns depth. When you suffer humiliation, your self learns humility. When you suffer failure, your self learns resilience. Suffering is the chisel carving away what is superficial. It shapes you with precision. It exposes the weak points in your character, not to destroy you, but to strengthen the places where you must grow. There is a reason people who have suffered deeply often possess a presence that cannot be imitated. Their eyes hold stories, their silence carries authority, their words carry weight. They have walked through fires that forced them to meet parts of themselves others never encounter. The self that emerges from suffering is not naive. It is grounded, aware, unshakable. It has learned through experience what cannot be learned from theory. The self forged in suffering develops emotional intelligence because it has felt everything. It develops compassion because it knows what pain does to a person. It develops boundaries because it learned what happens without them. Suffering strips away illusions about the world and about yourself. When you suffer, you see who truly supports you and who disappears. You see which values matter and which are empty. You see which dreams are yours and which were imposed on you. You see how much strength you actually carry and how much you hide from yourself. In suffering, all facades fall. You meet your fear, your rage, your sadness, your vulnerability, your longing. You meet the truths you avoided. And in meeting them, you begin to understand who you are beneath the noise of expectations. The self forged through suffering is not built quickly. It forms through cycles of breakdown and reconstruction. You break, you heal, you break again, you heal again. Each cycle deepens you, shapes you, strengthens you. You start to realize that the goal is not to avoid hardship, but to transform through it. You become less afraid of difficulty because you have proof that hardship refines you. You develop a relationship with yourself built on trust. You know you can endure, adapt, and rise. That trust cannot be taught. It must be earned through suffering. Suffering is also the birthplace of authenticity. When you suffer, you lose the energy to maintain masks. You stop pretending to be who others want you to be. You stop chasing validation. You stop living from fear of judgment. Your suffering collapses the false roles you once played, and you begin to act from the truth of your being. This authenticity becomes the foundation of the self. You speak more honestly, choose more wisely, love more fearlessly, and live more intentionally because you understand the cost of ignoring your truth. The self that emerges from suffering also becomes capable of deeper relationships. You connect with others from a place of understanding rather than pretense. You listen differently. You empathize differently. You love differently. Suffering widens the heart. It breaks the rigid structures of ego and makes space for vulnerability, presence, and sincerity. People feel safe with those who have suffered because suffering teaches humility and dissolves superiority. You no longer look down on others, you see yourself in them. Suffering also teaches responsibility. When pain strips away excuses, you realize that no one is coming to save you. You understand that your healing, your decisions, your growth, and your future depend on your willingness to confront your inner world. This responsibility is not a burden, it is the birth of personal power. You stop waiting for life to change and begin changing yourself. You stop blaming circumstances and begin shaping your responses. Through suffering, you learn that power is not control over the world, but mastery over your inner state. The self is forged through suffering because suffering forces transformation in a way nothing else can. It opens the door to awareness, breaks the shell of the ego, awakens the deeper self, and shapes you into someone capable of living with clarity, courage, and authenticity.